Sometimes the people who look the poorest are the ones fighting the hardest to keep their dignity alive. Daniel Whitmore had spent most of his life around people who wanted something from him. Investors wanted his signature. Reporters wanted his attention. Women wanted the version of him they saw on magazine covers. But on that rainy Thursday night in Manhattan, the one person who caught his attention was a little blonde girl quietly slipping paper napkins into her tiny purse. Daniel noticed her from across the restaurant the moment she looked around to make sure nobody was watching. The restaurant was the kind of place where a single steak cost more than most people spend on groceries in a week. Soft piano music floated through the air, while businessmen laughed over glasses of bourbon and waiters carried plates that looked too expensive to touch. Daniel sat alone near the window in his usual tailored charcoal suit, barely listening to the financial director talking through an earpiece about an acquisition in Chicago. Then he saw the little girl carefully fold another white napkin and hide it beside a worn pink hairbrush inside her bag. His eyes narrowed slightly. For a brief second, he assumed the worst. Maybe her mother was teaching her to steal. Maybe they were trying to take advantage of the restaurant. But then he looked at the woman sitting across from the child. She looked exhausted in a way expensive vacations could never fix. Her pale sweater had tiny loose threads near the sleeves, and her sneakers looked faded from years of use despite being scrubbed clean. Blonde hair was tied back quickly, as if she'd been rushing between jobs all day. Yet there was something careful about her posture, something proud. She kept smiling at the little girl, even while pretending not to notice that their table only held one small plate of pasta and 2 glasses of water. "Mom, can I take one more?" The little girl whispered softly, holding another folded napkin. The mother glanced around, embarrassed. "Lily, sweetheart, just 1 or 2, okay?" she said gently. "I don't want them getting upset with us." Lily nodded quickly. "I just want the apartment to look pretty for my birthday." Daniel slowly removed the earpiece from his ear. The financial director was still talking, but he no longer heard a word. Across the restaurant, the little girl carefully smoothed out one of the napkins on the table and smiled proudly at her mother. "I can fold them into flowers like the videos online," she whispered. "Then it'll feel fancy when we eat cake tomorrow." Emily Carter tried to smile back, but Daniel caught the flicker in her eyes. The guilt, the heartbreak, the silent panic of a mother trying to create magic out of absolutely nothing. A waiter approached their table holding the bill folder. Emily immediately reached for it before Lily could see the total. She opened it carefully, and for half a second, the color drained from her face. Daniel noticed the tiny movement instantly. Emily inhaled slowly, forcing calm into her voice. "Come on, honey," she said softly. "We should head home." Lily looked disappointed but nodded politely. Then, as the waiter walked past Daniel's table carrying a sizzling ribeye steak, the smell drifted through the air toward the little girl. Lily's eyes followed the plate for only a second before she quickly looked down at her hands, almost ashamed for noticing. That was the moment Daniel felt something twist painfully in his chest. Because Lily didn't complain. She didn't beg. She didn't throw a tantrum like most kids her age. Instead, she smiled at her mother and said quietly, "The pasta was really good, Mom. I'm full." But Daniel had built a billion-dollar company by learning how to spot lies before anyone else could. And he knew instantly when he saw one. Daniel watched Emily reach into her purse with the kind of hesitation that only came from counting every dollar before spending it. Her fingers moved carefully through a collection of folded receipts, loose coins, and a nearly empty wallet that looked worn at the edges. She tried to angle the bill away from Lily's eyes while forcing a calm expression onto her face, but Daniel noticed the slight tremble in her hand. He had spent years negotiating billion-dollar deals, and he knew pressure when he saw it. This was not embarrassment over an expensive dinner. This was fear, real fear. Emily quietly slid 2 $20 bills into the check folder along with a few crumpled singles. Then she lowered her head for a moment as if silently doing math in her mind. Lily leaned closer and whispered, "Did we leave enough for a tip?" Emily immediately smiled, though it looked fragile. "A small one," she answered softly. "That is still important." Daniel looked away for a second, unexpectedly unsettled by those words. Most wealthy people he knew spent more on wine in one night than this woman probably earned in several days. Yet she was still worried about leaving a proper tip. Across the room, a group of investors laughed loudly while half-finished meals sat untouched on their table. Daniel suddenly found himself irritated by the sound. Emily helped Lily into her faded yellow coat and gently fixed the little girl's scarf. "Did you have a good birthday dinner?" she asked quietly. Lily grinned instantly. "It was amazing." Emily brushed a strand of hair behind Lily's ear. "I know it is not exactly the big party I promised." "I did not want a big party," Lily said quickly. "I just wanted to eat somewhere fancy with you." Daniel felt that strange tightness in his chest again. The little girl could not have been older than 7, but she spoke with the careful understanding of someone much older. As Emily stood to leave, Lily's small purse slipped from her shoulder and fell onto the floor beside Daniel's table. A few folded napkins scattered across the polished wood floor like white paper flowers. Lily gasped and immediately knelt down to grab them. "I am sorry," she whispered nervously. Daniel instinctively bent down to help. One of the napkins had already been folded carefully into the shape of a rose. He paused when he saw tiny pencil marks drawn along the edges. "Happy birthday, Mom." Daniel looked at the child in silence for a moment before handing it back. Lily's cheeks turned pink with embarrassment. "I was practicing," she admitted quietly. The real cake place wanted $20 for decorations. Emily looked mortified. "Lily, honey, you do not have to explain." But Daniel barely heard her. $20. The amount was so insignificant to him that he had probably spent more than that on bottled water that morning without noticing. Yet for this little girl, it was enough to replace an entire birthday decoration set with folded restaurant napkins. Emily quickly gathered the rest of the paper flowers and stood up. "Thank you," she told Daniel politely, avoiding direct eye contact. Her voice carried the careful distance of someone used to people judging her. Daniel nodded once. Up close, he could see the exhaustion hidden beneath her makeup. Faint shadows rested under her eyes, and there was a tiny burn mark near the cuff of her sleeve, the kind someone got from rushing around hot kitchen equipment. Probably restaurant work. Maybe more than one job. Lily suddenly tugged on her mother's hand before they could leave. "Mom," she whispered loudly enough for Daniel to hear. "Can we walk by the bakery window again on the way home?" Emily hesitated only a second. "Just to look," she answered gently. Lily smiled brightly. "That is okay. Looking is still fun." Daniel stared at them as they slowly walked toward the exit beneath the warm golden lights of the restaurant. Then, for reasons he could not fully explain, he found himself standing up from his chair before they reached the door. Rain tapped softly against the tall glass windows as Emily pushed open the restaurant door and stepped onto the crowded Manhattan sidewalk with Lily beside her. Cold air rushed around them immediately, and Lily pulled her thin yellow coat tighter around her shoulders while carefully protecting the folded napkins inside her little purse. Behind them, the warm glow of the restaurant faded into reflections on the wet pavement. Emily forced a cheerful tone into her voice. "Okay, birthday girl, where to next?" Lily pointed excitedly down the block. "The bakery window." Emily smiled, even though exhaustion sat heavily behind her eyes. "Just for 1 minute." They started walking through the busy evening crowd while taxis splashed through shallow rainwater near the curb. Daniel stood just inside the restaurant entrance watching them disappear beneath the city lights. He could have gone back to his table. He could have returned to discussing contracts and quarterly profits and the private car waiting outside for him. Instead, he found himself reaching for his coat. "Cancel the rest of my calls tonight," he told his assistant through his phone. There was silence on the other end. "Sir, the Tokyo investors are waiting for confirmation." Daniel kept his eyes on Emily and Lily crossing the street. "Tomorrow," he answered before ending the call. A few minutes later, he spotted them standing outside a small bakery window glowing with warm yellow light. Lily pressed her hands gently against the glass, completely mesmerized by the cakes inside. Chocolate frosting, strawberry shortcake, bright birthday candles shaped like stars. Daniel slowed his steps from across the street. Emily stood behind Lily with a soft smile that somehow looked both loving and heartbreaking at the same time. "That one is pretty," Lily whispered, pointing to a white cake covered in pink flowers. "It is beautiful," Emily agreed quietly. "Do you think rich people buy cakes like that all the time?" Lily asked. Emily laughed softly under her breath. "Probably not all the time." Lily tilted her head innocently. "If we ever get rich, I still want grocery store cakes sometimes." Emily smiled wider at that. "Deal." Daniel watched the exchange carefully. No bitterness. No anger. No complaining about life being unfair. Just a mother trying desperately to keep her daughter's world soft despite reality, pushing against them from every direction. Then Lily noticed a tray of small birthday candles near the display. "Mom," she whispered carefully. "Candles are only $3. Emily froze almost invisibly. Most people would never have noticed it. Daniel did. Emily reached into her pocket slowly and felt around for money without looking. Her fingers stopped. Empty. For a second, her face changed completely. The brave expression disappeared, replaced by panic so fast and raw that Daniel felt it in his own chest. But then Emily quickly smiled again before Lily could fully notice. "We still have the candles from last year somewhere at home," she said gently. Lily nodded immediately, pretending to believe her. "That is okay. Reusing is smart anyway." Daniel looked away briefly, jaw tightening. He remembered his own mother saying things like that years ago inside a tiny apartment in Brooklyn. "We already ate earlier. I am not hungry. We can use the old one again." Back then, he had believed her too, until he grew older and realized parents became magicians when they were poor. They could turn fear into smiles and empty kitchens into bedtime stories. Across the street, Emily touched Lily's shoulder softly. "Come on, sweetheart. We should catch the subway before it gets too late." Lily gave the cake one final look before stepping away from the window. But as they turned toward the subway entrance, Lily suddenly coughed hard into her sleeve. The sound stopped Daniel cold. It was not a normal cough. It was deep and painful, the kind that came from someone who had been sick longer than they should have been. Emily immediately crouched beside her. "Lily, honey, are you okay?" Lily nodded quickly between coughs. "I am fine." But Emily's eyes filled with worry so instantly that Daniel knew this was not new. She rubbed Lily's back gently while trying to hide her fear from her daughter. Then Lily looked up at her mother with a weak little smile and whispered, "Please do not spend birthday money on medicine again." Daniel felt something shift inside him at those words, something personal and uncomfortable and impossible to ignore. The sound of Lily's coughing stayed in Daniel's head long after the traffic noise swallowed the two of them into the crowded sidewalk. He stood there for several seconds under the glow of the bakery sign, while people rushed past him holding umbrellas and coffee cups, completely unaware that a billionaire in a $12,000 coat suddenly could not stop thinking about a little girl asking her mother not to spend birthday money on medicine. Daniel had spent years training himself not to feel too much. Emotion slowed people down. Emotion clouded judgment. That was what investors loved about him. He was decisive, logical, impossible to manipulate. Yet something about Emily Carter and her daughter kept breaking through that carefully controlled version of himself. Maybe it was because Lily reminded him too much of someone he used to be. Or maybe it was because Emily reminded him of the person who had sacrificed everything to keep him alive when he was young. Before he realized it, Daniel was following them from a distance down the block. Emily held Lily's hand tightly, while the little girl skipped carefully around puddles despite her cough. Every few steps, Emily glanced down with quiet concern. "You are sure you are okay?" she asked softly. "I am okay," Lily answered quickly. "I just get coughs sometimes." Emily did not look convinced. They reached the subway entrance, and Lily suddenly stopped beside a street musician playing violin near the stairs. The melody floated gently through the cold air, while commuters hurried around him without stopping. Lily listened like it was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. Then she dug into her tiny purse and pulled out 2 quarters. Daniel watched Emily's eyes widen immediately. "Sweetheart," Emily whispered carefully, "you do not have to give away your money." Lily looked up innocently, but he looks cold. Before Emily could stop her, Lily walked over and dropped the coins into the musician's open case. The old violin player smiled warmly. "Thank you, Princess." Lily beamed proudly and hurried back to her mother. Daniel stared at the nearly empty purse hanging from the little girl's shoulder and felt unexpectedly ashamed of himself. He had seen wealthy adults walk past homeless people every day without even making eye contact. Yet this child who barely had enough for birthday candles still wanted to help someone colder than she was. Emily crouched slightly beside Lily and kissed the top of her head. "That was kind," she whispered. "Grandma used to say kindness matters most when you do not have much," Lily replied. Daniel froze at the mention of a grandmother. Something about the way Emily's expression fell for just half a second told him there was another loss hidden somewhere inside their story. As Emily and Lily disappeared down the subway stairs, Daniel finally moved again. This time, he did not hesitate. He followed them underground. The subway station smelled faintly of rainwater and old concrete. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while exhausted commuters stood silently near the tracks. Daniel spotted Emily helping Lily onto a bench at the far end of the platform. Lily leaned tiredly against her mother's shoulder while Emily rubbed her back gently. Then Emily reached into her purse again. Daniel noticed her counting pills inside a nearly empty orange prescription bottle. Her face tightened immediately. Not enough left. Emily quietly closed the bottle before Lily could see. "Do I need more medicine?" Lily asked softly. Emily forced a calm smile. "Maybe in a few days." Lily lowered her voice. "It is okay if we wait until next paycheck." Daniel looked away sharply at those words because suddenly he was no longer standing in a Manhattan subway station. He was 10 years old again inside a tiny apartment in Brooklyn, hearing his own mother whisper almost the exact same thing while she split cough medicine into smaller doses to make it last longer. He remembered cold nights, empty refrigerators, utility bills stacked on the kitchen counter. He remembered pretending to be asleep while his mother cried quietly in the bathroom because she thought he could not hear her. Daniel swallowed hard and loosened his tie slightly as the memory hit him harder than expected. Across the platform, Lily suddenly looked toward the tunnel lights with sleepy excitement. "Mom," she whispered, "when I grow up and get rich, I am buying you the biggest birthday cake in New York." Emily laughed softly despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "I do not need the biggest cake." Lily smiled and rested her head against her mother again. "Then I will buy you time to sleep." Those words hit Daniel harder than any business negotiation ever had. The subway train arrived with a rush of wind that swept through the station and rattled the loose papers near the tracks. Emily guided Lily carefully onto the train while Daniel stepped into the same car a few doors behind them. He told himself he was only making sure they got home safely. Nothing more. But deep down, he already knew that was not true. The train was half full with tired office workers staring blankly at their phones and construction workers heading home after long shifts. Emily sat near the back beside the window, pulling Lily close against her side. The little girl looked exhausted now. Her eyes kept drifting shut between coughs while her small fingers still clutched the folded napkin flowers inside her purse like they were treasure. Daniel remained standing near the opposite door, pretending to check emails on his phone while quietly watching them through the reflection in the subway glass. A few minutes later, Lily rested her head against Emily's shoulder and whispered, "Mom?" "Yes, sweetheart. Are you sad we could not get cake?" Emily smiled softly and kissed the top of her daughter's head. "No, tonight was already special." Lily looked unconvinced. "Really?" Emily nodded gently. "Do you know what my favorite part was?" Lily shook her head. Emily brushed a loose strand of blonde hair away from Lily's face. "Watching you smile in the restaurant." Lily grinned sleepily. "Even when I stole napkins?" Emily laughed quietly under her breath for the first time all night. It was soft and tired, but real. "Borrowed," she corrected. "You borrowed napkins." Lily giggled weakly before coughing again into her sleeve. Emily's smile faded immediately. She pressed the back of her hand gently against Lily's forehead, trying not to show concern. Daniel noticed the movement instantly. "Fever." Emily looked toward the subway map above the doors, and for a brief second, Daniel saw panic flash across her face again. She checked her phone quickly, then closed her eyes like someone mentally calculating how many hours remained before another shift started. When the train finally stopped in Queens nearly 30 minutes later, Emily carefully woke Lily and helped her off the subway. Daniel followed several steps behind as they walked through quieter streets lined with old apartment buildings and flickering storefront signs. The expensive Manhattan skyline felt far away now. Here, the sidewalks were cracked, laundromats stayed open past midnight, and grocery stores advertised instant noodles for 99 cents. Lily's energy faded more with every block. Eventually, Emily stopped beside a corner pharmacy and looked through the glass window at the medicine shelves inside. Daniel watched her hand tighten around the strap of her purse. She did not go in. Instead, she looked down at Lily and smiled gently. "Tomorrow, okay?" Lily nodded, even though disappointment crossed her face for only a second. "Okay." They continued walking until they reached a narrow apartment building with peeling paint near the entrance. Emily searched her purse for keys while Lily leaned against the wall, coughing quietly into her scarf again. Then Emily's phone rang. The sound made her tense immediately. Daniel stopped near the edge of the sidewalk, hidden partially beneath the awning of a closed deli. Emily glanced at the screen and inhaled slowly before answering. "Hello." Her expression changed almost instantly. "I know," she said softly. Pause. "I just need a few more days." Another pause. Lily looked up at her mother nervously. Emily lowered her voice further. "Please, Mr. Garrison. I am already working double shifts." Daniel did not need to hear the rest to understand. "Rent." Emily turned slightly away from Lily while listening to the angry voice coming through the phone. "I understand," she whispered. "I said I understand." Then the call ended. Emily stood completely still for several seconds afterward. Her shoulders sagged slightly, and for the first time all night, she looked defeated. Not dramatic, not emotional, just tired in a way that seemed too heavy for someone her age. Lily stepped closer carefully. Was it the landlord? Emily immediately forced another smile onto her face. "Everything is fine." Lily looked at her quietly for a moment before speaking in a voice far too understanding for a 7-year-old child. "You do not have to pretend when it is just us." Daniel felt those words settle heavily inside him as rain continued falling softly across the empty street. Emily unlocked the apartment building door with slow movements, as if even her hands were exhausted. The hallway inside was dimly lit, carrying the faint smell of old paint and radiator heat. Lily stayed close beside her mother while still trying to smile through her coughs. Daniel remained outside beneath the rain for another moment, staring at the building entrance long after the door closed behind them. He should have left. Any reasonable person would have. Yet his feet refused to move. Across the street, a black luxury SUV waited quietly near the curb where his driver had finally located him after hours of unanswered calls. Daniel barely noticed it. His attention stayed fixed on the third-floor apartment window where a small light flickered on several seconds later. Through the thin curtains, he could see faint shadows moving around inside. Lily's small silhouette bounced briefly across the room before disappearing. Then Emily's shadow passed slowly behind her, shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Daniel loosened his tie again and exhaled sharply. This was ridiculous. He did not know these people. He had spent his entire adult life avoiding emotional involvement with strangers because emotions complicated decisions. But tonight felt different in a way he could not explain. Maybe because nothing about Emily Carter resembled the people who usually tried to get close to him. She had not recognized him, had not flirted with him, had not looked impressed by wealth or status. If anything, she had avoided eye contact entirely, like she did not have the energy to care who he was. Daniel finally walked toward the SUV, but before he reached it, movement inside the apartment window caught his attention again. The curtain shifted slightly, and for a split second, he saw Lily standing on a chair near the window. She carefully taped one of the folded napkin flowers onto the glass from the inside. Then another. Then another. Tiny white paper flowers decorated the old apartment window like homemade birthday decorations glowing softly beneath weak yellow light. Daniel stopped walking completely. Something about that image hit him harder than it should have. A child making decorations out of restaurant napkins while the rest of New York spent thousands of dollars on parties without appreciating any of it. His phone suddenly rang in his pocket, pulling him back to reality. "What?" he answered distractedly. His assistant's voice came through immediately. "Sir, the board members are asking if you are attending tomorrow morning's meeting." Daniel stared at the apartment window while Lily proudly adjusted another paper flower. "Reschedule it." Silence. "Sir, I said reschedule it." His assistant hesitated carefully. "You have never postponed a quarterly board meeting before." Daniel rubbed his forehead slowly. "Then they will survive one surprise." He ended the call before hearing another word. Inside the apartment, the shadows moved again. Emily appeared beside Lily and seemed to notice the paper flowers on the window for the first time. Even from across the street, Daniel could see the way Emily's posture softened instantly. Lily pointed proudly toward the decorations while talking excitedly. Then Emily covered her mouth with one hand like she was trying not to cry. Daniel looked away for a second, suddenly uncomfortable watching such a private moment. He remembered his own mother reacting the same way when he was young and had once brought home a 99-cent grocery store cupcake for her birthday after saving lunch money for weeks. She had cried like someone handed her the world. Not because of the cupcake, Because someone remembered her. Daniel slowly leaned against the side of the SUV, staring at the rainwater running along the curb. For years, he had convinced himself success solved loneliness. Bigger homes, better cars, private jets, expensive watches. Yet every penthouse he owned still felt empty at night. Every holiday dinner eventually ended with silence. Every relationship in his life somehow became transactional. Meanwhile, inside that tiny apartment across the street, a mother and daughter were turning folded napkins into birthday decorations and somehow creating more warmth than he had felt in years. Then suddenly the apartment light shut off. A few seconds later, Daniel saw only the soft outline of the paper flowers against the dark window. One flower slowly peeled loose from the glass and drifted downward out of sight. For reasons he could not fully explain, that tiny detail made something inside him finally break. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone again, and dialed a number he had not used in months. "Evelyn," he said quietly when the call connected. "I need the number for the best pediatric doctor in New York. Tonight." By 6:30 the next morning, Emily was already awake even though she had barely slept 3 hours. The tiny apartment was still dark except for weak sunlight leaking through the edges of the curtains where the folded napkin flowers remained taped to the window. Lily lay curled beneath a faded blanket on the couch bed, coughing softly in her sleep. Emily quietly crossed the room and pressed her hand against Lily's forehead again. Still warm. She closed her eyes for a brief second before forcing herself to move. Rent was late. Medicine was running out. Missing work was not an option. Emily stepped into the tiny kitchen corner and opened the refrigerator. Half a gallon of milk. A few eggs. Cheap sandwich bread. She stared silently at the shelves for a moment before grabbing the eggs. A few minutes later, the smell of buttered toast filled the apartment. Lily slowly woke up to the sound of plates being set on the table. "Morning, birthday girl," Emily said gently, smiling despite the exhaustion under her eyes. Lily rubbed her eyes sleepily. "Did I fall asleep before cake?" Emily's smile faltered almost invisibly. "We will do cake tonight instead." Lily nodded without complaint. "Okay." Emily turned away quickly so her daughter would not notice the guilt in her face. Then suddenly there was a knock at the apartment door. Emily froze immediately. Her first thought was the landlord. Lily looked nervous too. The knock came again, softer this time. Emily slowly walked to the door and opened it carefully. A woman in navy blue medical scrubs stood outside, holding a leather bag and a paper coffee cup. "Emily Carter?" the woman asked kindly. Emily blinked in confusion. "Yes. My name is Dr. Rebecca Hayes. I was asked to stop by and check on Lily." Emily stiffened instantly. "I think you have the wrong apartment." Dr. Hayes smiled gently. "A friend of yours was concerned." Emily's expression changed immediately. Confusion mixed with suspicion. "I do not have friends who send private doctors." Dr. Hayes glanced toward Lily, who was now coughing again inside the apartment. "Maybe not, but someone wanted to help." Emily hesitated for several long seconds. Every instinct told her to refuse. People rarely offered help without expecting something in return. But then Lily coughed harder again, and Emily stepped aside quietly. "5 minutes," she said cautiously. Dr. Hayes entered the apartment with calm professionalism while Lily watched curiously from the couch. "Are you a real doctor?" Lily asked. Dr. Hayes laughed softly. "I hope so. Medical school was very expensive." Lily smiled weakly at that. While the doctor checked Lily's breathing and temperature, Emily stood near the kitchen with folded arms, visibly uncomfortable. "Who sent you?" she asked again. Dr. Hayes glanced up briefly. "A man named Daniel Whitmore." Emily frowned slightly, trying to remember. Then realization slowly crossed her face. "The man from the restaurant." Dr. Hayes nodded once. Emily looked stunned for a moment before her expression hardened again. "We cannot afford this." "You are not being charged," Dr. Hayes answered calmly. Emily shook her head immediately. "That is not what I mean." Dr. Hayes studied her quietly for a second, then lowered her voice. "Miss Carter, Lily has a respiratory infection that should have been treated days ago. She needs antibiotics and proper rest." Emily's face paled slightly. "Is it serious?" "Not if she gets treatment now." Emily looked toward Lily, who sat swinging her feet gently while trying to fold another napkin flower from breakfast tissues. Guilt flashed across Emily's face so painfully that Dr. Hayes softened her tone immediately. "You have clearly been doing your best." Emily laughed once under her breath, but there was no humor in it. My best does not seem to cover much lately. Before Dr. Hayes could answer, another knock sounded at the apartment door. Emily turned sharply, already tense again. But this time, when she opened the door, Daniel Whitmore himself stood in the hallway holding a plain white bakery box in his hands. Emily stared at Daniel in complete disbelief, while rainwater dripped quietly from the shoulders of his dark coat onto the hallway floor. Up close, he looked even more out of place inside the old apartment building than he had inside the restaurant. Everything about him carried the polished confidence of someone used to private elevators, penthouses, and boardrooms worth more than the entire block. Yet somehow he stood there looking strangely uncertain while holding a small white bakery box with both hands. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, Lily's voice broke the silence from inside the apartment. "Mom," she whispered excitedly. "That is the restaurant man." Daniel glanced past Emily and gave Lily a small smile. "Hi, Lily." Lily immediately smiled back despite her tired face. Emily remained tense near the doorway. "You sent a doctor?" she asked carefully. Daniel nodded once. "I hope that was okay." Emily crossed her arms instinctively. People do not usually send doctors to strangers. Daniel looked down briefly before answering. Maybe they should. Emily did not know what to say to that. Dr. Hayes quietly packed her medical equipment nearby, sensing the delicate tension in the room. Daniel lifted the bakery box slightly. "I also brought something." Lily's eyes widened immediately. "Is that cake?" Daniel smiled faintly. "I heard somebody had a birthday." Emily looked embarrassed instantly. "You really did not have to do this." "I know," Daniel answered gently. "I wanted to." For a moment, Emily looked almost frustrated by his kindness, like accepting help physically hurt her pride. Daniel recognized that expression because his mother used to wear it too. People who survived hardship long enough often stopped trusting generosity. It always came with conditions eventually. Lily coughed softly again, breaking the silence. Dr. Hayes stepped toward Emily and quietly handed her a prescription note. "The pharmacy already has everything prepared," she explained. Emily looked confused. "Prepared? It has been paid for," Daniel said before she could ask further. Emily's face changed immediately. "No," Daniel remained calm. "It is just medicine." "No," Emily repeated more firmly this time. "I appreciate the concern, but I cannot let you do all this." Lily looked nervously between them while hugging one of her folded napkin flowers against her chest. Daniel carefully set the bakery box down on the kitchen counter. "Miss Carter, I am not trying to insult you." Emily let out a tired breath. "Then what exactly are you trying to do?" Daniel hesitated because the honest answer sounded ridiculous even inside his own head. He was trying to understand why a little girl making decorations out of restaurant napkins affected him more deeply than billion-dollar business deals ever had. He was trying to understand why this tiny apartment felt warmer than his empty penthouse overlooking Central Park. But instead he answered quietly, "I think you need help." Emily laughed softly under her breath, though there was pain behind it. That is the problem with rich people. You see struggle and immediately assume people are waiting to be rescued. Daniel absorbed the words without reacting defensively. Maybe because sometimes they are. Emily shook her head immediately. "I do not want Lily growing up believing survival depends on strangers saving us." Daniel looked toward Lily sitting quietly on the couch. "From what I have seen, she is growing up believing kindness matters." That answer caught Emily off guard. Before she could respond, Lily suddenly spoke in a small voice. "Mom." Emily turned instantly. "Yes, sweetheart." Lily looked down at the floor nervously. "Can we please keep the cake?" Emily's expression softened immediately. Lily rarely asked for anything. Daniel saw the conflict in Emily's eyes as she looked between her daughter and the bakery box on the counter. Finally, she closed her eyes briefly and exhaled. "Okay," she whispered. Lily smiled so brightly that even Dr. Hayes laughed softly. Daniel felt something unexpectedly warm settle inside his chest watching that tiny moment. Then Lily looked at Daniel carefully. "Did you really buy medicine too?" Daniel nodded once. Lily lowered her gaze to the folded napkin flower in her hands. "Nobody buys us things." The apartment suddenly became very quiet after those words. Emily looked devastated hearing her daughter say it out loud. Daniel swallowed hard before answering softly, "Well, somebody should." 6 months later, the apartment window looked completely different. The old cracked blinds were gone. replaced by soft cream-colored curtains that glowed warmly against the evening lights of Queens. Small potted flowers rested along the windowsill, and laughter drifted faintly through the open kitchen window into the cool autumn air outside. Inside the apartment, Lily stood carefully on a chair beside the dining table while concentrating very hard on lighting birthday candles. "Do not lean too close," Emily warned gently from the kitchen. "I know," Lily answered proudly. "I am 8 now. That is basically an adult." Emily laughed softly while placing plates onto the table. The sound no longer carried the exhaustion Daniel remembered from that rainy night months earlier. There was still tiredness sometimes because life was still life, but now it existed beside something else too. Stability, peace, hope. Daniel stood quietly near the doorway watching them both, while holding a small gift bag in one hand. He still found moments like this strange sometimes. Strange in the best possible way. After years of waking up inside silent penthouses and spending holidays surrounded by people who cared more about his money than his company, he now somehow found himself looking forward to Tuesday dinners in Queens more than charity galas in Manhattan. Lily suddenly turned around and pointed dramatically at him. "No peeking at the cake." Daniel raised both hands innocently. "I did not see anything." "You totally saw frosting." "Maybe a little frosting." Lily narrowed her eyes suspiciously before grinning. Emily shook her head while smiling to herself. Watching the two of them together still felt surreal sometimes. After that first morning, Daniel had not tried to throw money at their problems the way most wealthy people might have. Instead, he quietly arranged a flexible administrative position for Emily at one of his foundation offices after learning she had years of experience managing schedules and customer accounts before Lily got sick. Emily had resisted at first, almost refusing the offer entirely until Daniel finally told her the truth. "I am not giving you charity," he had said. "I am giving someone competent an opportunity." That mattered to her, more than he realized. Now Emily worked normal hours for the first time in years. Lily received proper medical treatment and no longer coughed through the night. The landlord stopped calling because rent was always paid on time. Small things, ordinary things. But Daniel had learned those were often the things people prayed hardest for. Lily climbed carefully down from the chair and stepped back proudly to admire the birthday cake sitting in the center of the table. White frosting, pink flowers, exactly like the one she had stared at through the bakery window months ago. But beside the cake sat something else too. Folded white napkins shaped into flowers. Daniel noticed them instantly. Emily caught him looking and smiled softly. She insisted. Lily nodded proudly. Tradition. Daniel felt his chest tighten unexpectedly. Lily walked over and grabbed his hand before pulling him toward the table. "Sit down. Mom made steak." Daniel blinked in surprise. "Steak?" Emily looked slightly embarrassed. "It is not restaurant quality." "It smells amazing," Daniel answered honestly. Lily climbed into her chair while the candlelight flickered warmly across the room. Then she looked at Daniel very seriously. "You know what the best part is?" "What?" Lily smiled. "Now we can keep the lights on and still buy cake." The room went quiet for a second after those words. Emily lowered her eyes quickly, emotional all over again despite how much life had improved. Daniel looked around the small apartment filled with candlelight, homemade paper flowers, warm food, and people who genuinely cared about each other. Then he realized something that no business award or luxury penthouse had ever taught him. The poorest people he had ever met had protected their dignity more fiercely than the rich protected their fortunes. Lily suddenly held up one of the folded napkin flowers toward him. "This one is for you," she said. Daniel carefully took it from her small hands. It was uneven and slightly crumpled compared to the expensive things people usually gave him, but somehow it felt more valuable than all of them combined. For the first time in years, Daniel Whitmore no longer felt like a man standing outside someone else's happiness looking in through the glass. Somehow, quietly and unexpectedly, he had finally been invited inside.